Imagine if every major nation on Earth suddenly collapsed within a single decade. Governments fell, cities were abandoned, trade networks crumbled, and entire populations simply vanished. That's exactly what happened around 1200 BC in what historians call the Bronze Age collapse, the most catastrophic civilizational failure in human history. Welcome back to Beneath the Ruins. Today we're investigating the mystery that nearly ended human civilization as we know it. In just a few decades, every major power from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia either collapsed entirely or barely survived in a weakened state. Cities that had thrived for centuries were burned and abandoned. Trade networks that had connected the ancient world for a millennium disappeared overnight. Literacy itself almost vanished from entire regions. What could cause such widespread destruction? Was it climate change? Mysterious invaders? Economic collapse? Or something even more catastrophic? The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, and the answer might hold warnings for our own interconnected world. Around 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to some of humanity's greatest civilizations. The Egyptian New Kingdom controlled the Nile Valley and much of the Middle East. The Hittite Empire dominated modern-day Turkey and challenged Egypt for supremacy. The Mycenaean Greeks ruled the Aegean from their fortress palaces. These weren't small city-states. They were massive, sophisticated empires with millions of subjects. These civilizations were interconnected through an elaborate network of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Egyptian gold flowed north in exchange for Mesopotamian textiles. Hittite iron reached Greek palaces in return for Mycenaean pottery. Royal marriages connected the ruling families of different empires. This was the world's first international system, and it had been stable for centuries. Then suddenly, it all fell apart. The collapse didn't happen overnight, but it was shockingly rapid by ancient standards. Between about 1200 and 1150 BC, just 2 generations, this entire world system disintegrated. The Hittite Empire vanished completely, its capital abandoned and forgotten. Most Mycenaean palaces were burned and never rebuilt. Egyptian power retreated to the Nile Valley. Archaeological evidence of this collapse is overwhelming and terrifying. Destruction layers dated to around 1200 BC have been found at dozens of sites across the eastern Mediterranean. These aren't the remains of single battles or raids. They show systematic destruction that suggests coordinated attacks or complete societal breakdown. At Ugarit, a major trading city in Syria, archaeologists found letters from the final days of the crisis. One message, never sent, begs for military aid from a neighboring kingdom. The enemy ships are already here. They have set fire to my cities and have done very ill to the land. All my troops are stationed in Hatti, and my ships are stationed in Lycia. Thus the country is abandoned to itself. The letter was found in the city's ruins. Help never came. But who were these mysterious enemies that could destroy the Bronze Age world? Ancient sources refer to them as the Sea Peoples, a confederation of groups with names like the Peleset, Cheker, and Shekelesh. Egyptian records describe massive invasions by these sea-borne raiders who attacked by land and sea with their entire families in tow. Men, women, children, and possessions loaded into ox carts and ships. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III left detailed accounts of his battles against the Sea Peoples around 1175 BC. His temple reliefs show naval battles with enemy ships, prisoners being taken, and Egyptian victory. But even Egyptian success came at enormous cost. The empire was bankrupted by the wars and never recovered its former power. The problem with the Sea Peoples theory is that it raises more questions than it answers. Where did these mysterious invaders come from? How could they simultaneously attack targets across thousands of miles of territory? Why did they appear just when civilization was at its most advanced? And where did they go after the destructions? A more troubling possibility is that the Sea Peoples weren't invaders at all, but refugees. What if the Bronze Age collapse was caused by some other catastrophe, and the Sea Peoples were desperate populations fleeing from destroyed homelands? This would explain why they traveled with their families and possessions, and why they seemed to attack everywhere at once. Climate data from around 1200 BC shows evidence of a significant cooling and drying trend across the eastern Mediterranean. Tree ring data, lake level measurements, and archaeological evidence all point to a period of drought and crop failures that lasted for decades. This climate shift would have been catastrophic for Bronze Age civilizations that depended on intensive agriculture to feed their large populations. Cities that had grown during centuries of favorable climate suddenly found themselves unable to feed their people. Rural populations would have been forced to migrate, creating refugee crises that could destabilize entire regions. But natural disasters alone don't explain the peculiar pattern of the Bronze Age collapse. Some regions were completely devastated, while others survived relatively intact. Cyprus and the Levantine coast were heavily damaged, but Egypt and Mesopotamia, while weakened, continued to function. Mycenaean Greece collapsed entirely. This patchy destruction suggests that the collapse wasn't caused by a single catastrophic event, but by a complex interaction of factors that affected different regions differently. The Bronze Age international system had become so interconnected that problems in one area could cascade rapidly to others. When this system collapsed, it took centuries to rebuild. The period from 1200 to 800 BC is sometimes called the Late Bronze Age Dark Age because so little is known about it. Literacy disappeared from many regions. Population levels plummeted. Technological knowledge was lost. It was as if human civilization had been reset to an earlier stage of development. 1200 BC wasn't just the year civilization almost ended. It was the year humanity learned that progress isn't always permanent, that complexity can be a weakness as well as a strength, and that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to forces they don't understand or control. What do you think caused the Bronze Age collapse? Could our modern, interconnected world be vulnerable to a similar catastrophe? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of how ancient civilizations face their darkest hours.